Hi, I'm Karen for Expert Village. Today we'll be making Sufganyot. Sufganyot are a special Hanukkah treat. Because the miracle of Hanukkah involved oil, Hanukkah treats are fried in oil. Sufganyot are special sweet yeast donuts that are filled with jam. Here are the ingredients that we'll be using today. We'll be using 2 to 2.5 cups of flour, a half a cup of warm water. You want to make sure that water is just warm to the touch and not hot because we'll be using it for our yeast. 1 tablespoon of yeast, 2 tablespoons of sugar, a 1/4 teaspoon of salt, and we're going to be using 1 whole egg and then 1 single egg yolk without the white. We'll also be frying our Sufganyot in oil. I'm using a canola oil. And we'll be filling it with jam. You can choose your favorite jam. I like the all fruit varieties. Okay, let's get started. We'll be making our Sufganyot batter in an electric mixer. Let's start with our warm water. Remember, you want that water to be warm to the touch, but not hot. Too hot water will kill your yeast. So you want that to be just warm to the touch. And we're using a half a cup of warm water. I'm going to add that to our mixing bowl. And then 1 tablespoon of yeast, and we'll add that to our mixing bowl. I'm just going to stir that around a little to get the yeast mixed in and set that to dissolve. And while we're waiting for our yeast to dissolve, I'm going to separate one of our eggs because our recipe calls for 1 whole egg and 1 egg separated. So we'll just crack that egg, and I'm going to crack the egg open very carefully like this and let the bottom shell hold the yolk and let the white sort of drip out into our bowl. You want to make sure there is a bowl there to catch that. And we're going to use that white. We'll save that aside. You can use that in another recipe. We're not using it in this recipe. And we're going to use our yolk. The extra yolk gives the dough a little more richness, a little more yellow color, and a little more richness. So we have 1 whole egg and 1 egg yolk, and I'll add that to our yeast in our water. I'm going to add the 2 tablespoons of sugar. Okay, a 1/4 teaspoon of salt. And I'm just going to mix that up to get the egg and the sugar and everything incorporated before we add our flour. Okay, just a little bit to get that incorporated. Then you want to add about 2 cups of the flour. Don't add all of the flour. Our recipe calls for 2.5 cups. We don't want to add all the flour because you might make a dry dough. You want to first incorporate most of the flour while it's have it a nice moist dough, and then if you feel like it needs a little more, you add a little more at a time. So we'll put that up, and we'll just mix that with a regular mixing beater. And you want to, you'll see, let me show you what the dough looks like. Okay, it will start to come together, and then I'll show you in a little while. It'll come together as a nice, soft, smooth ball. Now, when you're making a small amount of dough like this, you don't need to use a dough hook. A dough hook is for a larger amount. The paddle is just fine for a small amount of dough that we're making. Okay, let me show you that dough again. You see it's gathering up in a ball. It is still a little bit too sticky, so I'm going to add a little flour at a time while we're mixing it up until I get a nice smooth satiny dough. just pushing the dough, kneading in a little bit of the flour that's at the bottom of the bowl, and then I'll start it up again. And you just want to let that knead for a while until it becomes smooth and satiny. Okay, now that's been kneading for about 5 minutes, and I'm going to take the paddle out so that we can see the dough. The dough is nice and smooth, and you see it's cleaned the sides of the bowl. There's a little bit of sticky dough on the side, but it's mostly dry. And when you put that into a nice ball, a little bit of flour in my hand so it doesn't stick, but it's a nice dough like that, nice and soft and elasticy. It should pull like that and be firm. Now I haven't used all my flour, and don't worry about not using all your flour. You really are more concerned with the consistency of the dough. Now we're going to take our dough, and I'm just going to spray a plastic container or bowl or glass bowl, anything you want, with a little bit of oil. You can also just rub a little bit of oil on a bowl. You don't have to use the pan spray. And you put it in, you flip it over so that it's lightly coated with the oil all around. And then we can lightly cover that, and we'll set that aside. We'll set that aside for about an hour until it doubles in bulk. You could also set this aside in the refrigerator and let it rise overnight so that it's ready in the morning or later on in the afternoon. Our Sufganyot dough is risen now, and we're going to roll it out and make those nice donuts. Okay, so here's our dough. You want to have a little bit of flour to dust your work surface with. And just pull that dough out like this. And flatten it, just push the air out of it. And turn it over, and there's a little flour on there from before. I'm going to put this flour aside. You're going to roll the dough out to about somewhere between 1/2 inch and 1/4 inch, like that. Very easy. And I'm going to use a cup, about the size that I want, about 2-inch circle. If you have some cookie cutters, you can do that. These donuts are not a donut with a hole in it. They're a round donut. And just cut out as many donuts as you can out of your dough. That one's a little different size. And I'm going to place it on a pan, just a piece of baking paper. And we'll let those rise for a ½ hour, and then we will fry them and fill them. Now, after you do your first cutting, we'll gather up the dough and re-roll it out and cut the rest of it. Now, some recipes call for you to put the jam in it before frying, and I really don't recommend that because the jam usually leaks out during frying, and it makes a mess in the oil, and the donuts have burnt sugar all over them because of the jam. So I don't recommend, if you find a recipe that calls for putting the jam in before you fry it, I would recommend not using that sort of a recipe. Now with the rest of this dough, I'm just going to pinch it into a nice shape. And this one I'm just going to toss in. We'll use it for our testing piece when we want to test the oil to see if it's fried. Just take your scraps and set them aside, and we will use them for the testing the oil later. Okay, so this is going to sit for ½ hour, and then we will be frying it in the canola oil. Okay, let's fry up our donuts. You just want to carefully place the donuts into the oil, and they shouldn't be cooking up too fast. If it goes too fast, you want to turn your oil down. They should cook nice and slowly. If it browns up really fast on the outside, then it's not going to be cooked inside. So you want it to kind of slow cook, and you should adjust the flame under your oil if it gets too hot. You can also use the thermometer and check that the temperature should be around 375 degrees. These are nicely browned. You just give them a little flip over when they're brown on one side. I'm going to try to squeeze this last one in here. You need to have enough oil to float the donuts, or they'll get flat on one side. These are beautiful and golden. You don't want to make the donuts too large either, or they have trouble cooking inside and you end up with a doughy middle. So a 2-inch circle cup is the perfect size. Or something smaller. You could make almost like small little mini donut holes. When they browned on both sides, just remove them, drain a little of the oil, and remove them to a tray that's covered with paper towel or a cloth to catch the oil. Flip that last one. And then I'll show you how to fill them with a little jam. Now if you want to eat them plain, you just put a little bit of powdered sugar sprinkled over the top like this. If you're going to skip the jam, they're nice with a little powdered sugar. Those are beautiful golden donuts. Sufganyot. Now I'm going to show you how to fill your sufganyot with some jam. I'm using an all-fruit type. You can use any kind of jelly or jam that you want. I'm going to use a pastry bag with a very wide open tip. So if you set up your pastry bag, and you can either hold it like this, make your hand a little holder, or you can set your pastry bag into a cup like this to hold it while you fill it. And then just empty your jelly in there as much as you want. You don't put a lot in, it's just a little bit to make a taste. Now for sufganyot, you make the hole in the top center of the donut, and we're just going to cut a little hole, and we'll take our jelly and just give it a little squeeze. For a sufganyot, you want it to stick out a little bit. You want it to show on the top, a little bit of a red dot. So I'm going to just cut a little slit into each of our donuts. And then we'll just insert the tip and put a little squirt, whoops, into each donut. There you go. Oops, try not to be messy with it. And you want to have like a little dot on the top. That's a classic sufganyot look. And just a little bit of jelly. Okay, and then you just finish that off with a little sprinkling of powdered sugar. And those are ready to serve.